Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Today, we are going to talk about building trust and how sometimes we can get lost in translation. This is a right conversation that's focused on trust and how cultural differences can impact the way we communicate, make decisions, build relationships at work, whether that's with a colleague, your boss, or someone from another department. Trust is essential for building and maintaining successful relationships, especially in a diverse multicultural world like the one that we have in Rocket. But trust is not a one-size-fits-all concept. Different cultures, different people have different expectations, different values, and sometimes that can influence how we perceive and how we express trust. And if we want to build trust with diverse cultures, first we need to be aware and respect those differences. From things like language barriers, idioms, the definition of what personal space means to everyone. Most of us have experienced situations where things probably didn't go as planned, or they might have gotten lost in translation, like they say. And so things like tone and volume and eye contact. So in order to avoid misunderstandings, it's important to adapt our communication style to match what the others have and their preferences based on their culture. So let's spend the next hour or so hearing from our lovely panelists today on how they build trust in the workplace, how they have faced challenges in the past, whether that's at work or on a personal aspect, and how we can celebrate diversity. Just to go over a couple of the ground rules, these sessions are centered around having an open discussion, but I also understand that we have different backgrounds, and we want to make sure we keep in mind the Rocket values. So I'm sure everyone is going to be very respectful of others' opinions. And our discussion today, it gives us an opportunity to use those values and to share something that we feel comfortable. So again, this is a safe space. I'm Hillary Gilliman, for those of you that I haven't met before, although I think most of us have met in the past. I'm a Right Culture Pillar ambassador. I'm based in North Carolina, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm the sales engineer on the data mod side, supporting some of our data mod products, and I'm going to pass it to one of our first panelists, Fernando.
Hi, Hillary. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here in this panel. Love to participate in anything that has to do with right and culture. My name is Hernando Borda. I'm a principal product manager for the multi-value tools of the application modernization organization. And I'm also a right culture pillar ambassador. So that I live in Massachusetts, as the slide says. And I think relevant to this conversation, I was also born in Bogota, Colombia. That's me.
Thank you. Moving on in alphabetical order, Michelle.
Hi, Hillary. I am a RIDE Talent Pillar Ambassador, and I am located in South Carolina in the United States. My role here at Rocket, I am a Principal Customer Solutions Engineer, and I work on the IDSP program where I partner with IBM, and I'm really excited for our discussion today.
Thank you. Mugda?
Hey, Hillary. I am a Right Culture Pillar Ambassador, and I'm also the Director of Information Development team here at Rocket. Work with a fabulous team of tech writers all over the globe. And I'm really looking forward to this because it's a wonderful opportunity for me to be a part of this fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Norm?
I am not a Right Pillar ambassador or official person, so I can still participate. And my role, the role that I play at Rocket Software, is that of a principal sales engineer. So I help sell our software. I work for Hillary, so quite pleased about that. In fact, I focus on the content products specifically.
Thank you. And last but not least, Teresa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Parker. I'm a Director of Product Management in the Data Mod business unit, and I live in Colorado in the United States. And like Norm, I am not a RIDE Pillar Ambassador.
That's okay. Everyone is welcome. All right, let's get started. So how we're going to do this is we'll go with the first question. Everyone will get about 3 minutes to answer. We'll go in alphabetical order, which is the same order you will introduce yourselves. So let's go ahead. Question number 1. What have you learned from a previous experience when you dealt with miscommunication or having someone kind of like not really understanding what you said or did because of cultural differences? So we'll go with Hernando.
Thank you, Hillary. Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am a product manager. And so one of the things with product management is that we work with everybody. We work with sales and engineering, marketing, everybody else. But we don't have anybody really reporting to us. And one of the things that I've learned through the years is that, there is that power of influence that the role of the product manager has. And interestingly, that means that we work with organizations and we give requirements to organizations that report to someone else. Now, it's part of sometimes different geos, different places, and sometimes also just different areas within a country or different roles within our organization. You also have to really take into account what's the culture, and in particular, what are the structure of authority and how that group manages authority in a natural way. And just for the example, here in the US, we're a very open culture in which people are encouraged to speak their mind and to, whether you're talking to somebody that you report to or whether you're reporting someone else, if you agree or disagree, you're encouraged to, speak your mind. And, if you have grounding for what your argument might be, it doesn't matter who you're making that argument. Well, that doesn't work like that in every culture. There are cultures in which the authority is more top down, and if your boss says you jump, you just ask how high. You don't say, well, I don't think that I should jump. So the communication in this is part, and it is also part, communication also is part of attitude. You need to be respectful of that. You need to be really manage that in a way that is not threatening to anyone. Because if you just say, well, your boss may be telling you this, but I'm telling you that, and I'm the product manager, I'm doing what's right for the product, it's probably not going to go over that well. So that's one thing that I've learned, and I think I've made that mistake. Although I try to be as culturally aware as possible, and part of that is me having moved from a different culture to here. I try to do that, but it's not always that easy. So just keeping that in mind is really important.
Thank you for that. Michelle, what about you?
For me, this is a really great question. I think about cultural differences and the culture within our own country, not so much globally, because I'm from the West Coast. There's people from the East Coast, the South, and the North. And so those are cultural differences as well. And I had an experience where I worked with a coworker who was from a different part of the United States, and we really clashed a lot. We were not communicating well at all. I think that what I had to do was learn more about myself, learn more about our differences, and really investigate where I fit into the culture that I was working in. And you know, that really helped me because I first had to understand myself and understand how I was communicating with other people and not try to put what I thought or how I felt on that other person, but really just learned how to listen and worked on listening to understand. Um, and not always hearing someone talking and then before they're done have a response. To really take the time to listen clearly and to understand. There's always going to be differences between everyone, no matter where we are, but that's okay. Who we are and where we come from makes us unique, and that's a great thing. And we all have something to bring to the table. So, what I got from my experience the most was learning about myself and how I communicate to help with being able to communicate with everyone from different places.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Mukta, what about you? What have you learned from a previous experience?
Many things. The first one that I probably had to learn consciously was the famous Indian head wobble. I do it without really noticing, and that's how I grew up. And so I would just go sideways to agree wholeheartedly with someone. Like, absolutely, yes, but then that I had to really learn a lot to consciously tell myself a lot that, okay, when you are agreeing with somebody, you have to go up and down. And when you are saying no, you have to go sideways. And that's how globally people will understand me. That was the first learning for me, I think, in early 2000s. But later I understood a lot of things because as I observed my colleagues from India interact with my colleagues from other parts of the world, I realized that when English is not the first language that you grew up with, or you haven't learned it in your schooling, in your school days, if you are educated in a vernacular medium, there's a big chance that you might pronounce words differently. And one of my directors in information development in one of the previous organizations, she had encouraged us to start recording videos, and I would record the videos, but I would not give voiceover to those because I was extremely conscious about my pronunciations and my accent. And she said, because the world is coming together, because it's now a global village that we keep talking about, it's good to have different and various accents, and we should celebrate that variety. And she gave that confidence to all of us to record the videos in a slower pace so that everyone would understand what we are trying to say. And at the same time, celebrate that accent, neutralize our accent as much as possible. That was a great learning for me, that, how you should be authentic in what you are doing and you celebrate your whole self wherever you are. That was a great learning for me. Another is the small talk, which doesn't really think about the concept of personal space. Sometimes when it's not related to work and you really want to just bond with the colleague that you are working with day in and day out, it so happens that the concept of personal space is different in different cultures. And that's why I've seen a person from a European country talking to a girl from India, a woman from India. And this person was asking her if she is married. She said no. And then he asked her if she has any kids, and she was super offended. She did not realize that in his culture, it's all right to have kids without being married. And this is something that I'm talking about from 15 years ago. India is changing, is accepting all sorts of life in every form. But yes, back then she was offended, and Now she laughs at it, but these areas where we think that, personal space is extremely different for each culture, I think, and even within India, that difference is quite evident as we are coming together from different. So Rocket basically has 4 offices across India. Even in these 4 offices, we do see some subtle differences, and it's fun to visit all these offices because of that. Because then we get to see the diversity and we get to see how united we are across the diversity. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Norm, what about you?
Well, it may not come as a surprise, but Teresa and I are married. And she and I visited Prague several years ago for vacation and participated in a food tour. Food tours are a great way to learn about the culture you're visiting, because really so much can be learned from experiencing the restaurants that the locals frequent and sampling the food that's prevalent in that region. So we enjoy doing that. On this particular tour, we learned that the past few generations of Czech culture was heavily influenced by the Soviet occupation. Our guide shared that the Soviet government would spy on the people through bribery. So Czech people were coerced into spying on their own friends and family. And in response, their culture changed significantly. They learned to become suspicious of a smile. Generosity was seen as a bribe or proof that someone was trying to bribe them. So outwardly, you learned not to show emotion, not to smile, not to be generous, not to show what I personally would view as kindness. And that was a problem for me, because in the culture of how I was raised, I learned that a smile went a long way. I'm a middle child of 5 kids. And what they say about middle children is true for me. I'm a peacemaker. I learned that outward generosity was valued and seen as kindness, and people in my culture respond well to a smile or a nice gesture or even a random compliment. In Prague, I learned that I smile too much. And what I felt deep down as kindness was met with suspicion. Kindness is important to me. It's deeply important to me, and it's part of my very nature. And I learned that my default behavior to show kindness was at odds with that culture. Now, does that mean I didn't enjoy visiting Czech Republic? No, actually, quite the contrary. I fell in love with the land. I fell in love with the food and the people and the cities we visited, and it ranks really quite highly on my all-time favorite places and list of places to revisit. But next time I'll be a little bit more careful in how I present myself, and to be maybe a little less American.
Thank you for sharing. That's a great story. Teresa, what about you? What have you learned from a previous experience?
So mine goes back a long time when I was in university. At that time, I lived I went on a study abroad program, and I was living in a different culture where I stood out. The culture I was in was very homogenous, and it was extremely clear that I did not belong. So I'm very tall. I was very blonde at the time, and I was very different. At one point, some friends of mine and I were out. We had a holiday. There was a public holiday, and we went to a different city. We were shopping just because it was one of the things that we did to learn about the culture was go shopping and just see what was out there, because I mean, even school supplies were very different. So it was a great way to get insight into, what we were doing and what we were learning. And it was not just the schoolwork we were there for, it was for the experience. We were in a store, and we were kind of in the back. We were looking at a few things. They had some things that were just fun and cute and interesting. And we were speaking amongst ourselves, and we were speaking English. And we could hear the shopkeepers, the people who were in the shop that day, talking about us and saying things that were not particularly kind. And it was very hurtful. It was something that we didn't expect necessarily. We always got weird looks, me especially, but it was something where I didn't really expect that reaction. And so we, we knew what they were saying because we understood the language, and we decided to leave. And as we left, I said something to the person who had been most vocal about us, and I said, you lost out on a sale or something. And the look of shock and surprise on their face when they knew that we understood. And not only did I say it, I said it in that accent, which is not particularly common amongst people who are learning to speak that particular language. And it's something that has stuck with me to this day, that if I'm having a hard time with that particular situation, maybe I need to be not so quick to judge. We all judge. Everybody who's not like us is different, and sometimes different can be weird. Different doesn't mean wrong, and that's something that I've tried to live my life by. I don't always succeed, but I tried to live my life by that. And then another thing that I have learned from that is that just because you have an accent, Amugda, you were talking about your accent and the things that you've done to potentially, modify that or whatnot. Just because somebody has an accent, it means that they're learning another language, and that's something that should be celebrated. So when, as Norm mentioned, we're married, and when we travel, one of the things that we always try to do is be culturally sensitive. So not being quite so smiley when we visit Prague, but we always try and learn a few words in the language where we're going, at least hello, goodbye, how are you? How much does this cost? Things that will go a long way to try and foster, a little bit of a relationship. So we're at least trying, but those are the two takeaways I have. Different isn't wrong. Different isn't bad. Different is just different. And the fact that you have an accent or a different way of speaking is not a reflection of intelligence. It means that you have a capability that somebody else may not have.
Wow, that was so good. Thank you so much for sharing. All of you. I mean, I'm trying to take mental notes, and yes, like all of that has resonated from different is not bad. Like, yes, we all have accents. Yes, we've all felt a little bit uncomfortable in a situation or not quite really sure. It's like, oh wait, the smile is bad. I mean, Norm, I really like that one. But okay, so we'll move on to the second question, and then if we have time at the end, we can just do an open dialogue. Hey, what this person said resonated with me, or we can extend it. I'll just share like a short story. Like for me, like when I was younger in university, I was an exchange student in Australia. I was improving my English, and one of my best friends at the time, she's Dutch. So there were times where we didn't know the word in English. I knew the word in Spanish, she knew the word in Dutch. And we would try our best, like make hand signals, like, the thingy that you put on top of the other thingy. But it's, like it makes you realize that, everyone is trying, everyone is just trying to be empathetic. And we were at the beach one time and we're swimming and there's this big wave coming at us. So my gut reaction was to say, oh, watch out, like maybe duck or take cover or move to the side. So in Spanish, when you say watch out, you say aguas, which means waters in plural. So there's a big wave coming at us. I shout waters, and she's like, okay, yes, we're in the water. So she didn't feel that sense of imminent danger. The wave crashes. We're like, tossing and turning. She's like, why didn't you warn me? Like, I did. I told you, watch out. No, you didn't. You told me water. So it's those little things. I always remember that anecdote because something that I thought was going to be obvious obviously got lost in translation. And like she remembers that. She's like, the 5 words that I will remember forever in Spanish, waters, it's going to be the number 1 in my book. So okay, moving on. If you could go back to any of those moments or any other moment in the past where something didn't quite land, what would you do differently and why? So we'll stick with the same order. Hernando, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, in the situation that I was describing, I think it's just that situational awareness of working with your partner in rather than being kind of direct, you may actually have to team up to help people deliver what they're being asked for from their figures of authority, but at the same time do what is needed. So I think that there's that nuance. It's quite tricky because at the same time you have to also foment an environment in which everybody's opinions heard, regardless of what it is. So I think it's quite tricky of striking that balance, and it's not always easy. But I think, I mean, not necessarily that I would do it differently. I think it's a learned it's a learned process on how to handle those situations and how to work with everybody and get the work done without making other people do things that are going against their nature or their interests.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I think for me, if I could go back to that moment, um, I think part of the reason that I was in a situation where we were having a miscommunication because I was so driven on trying to get work done. I had a task, I wanted it done, I wanted it a certain way, and this person was not giving me what I needed. And instead of using empathy, I should have drawn more on being empathetic to where that person was. And if I focused in on that, really just using empathy to look at that person and really take account of where they are, I think the whole thing would have turned out differently. And I think that would be the big takeaway for me is just be more empathetic when you're dealing with people, and really understanding, your coworkers and who they are. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you. Mukta, what about you? If you could go back.
So, sensitizing oneself of other cultures and other um, people is definitely a good idea. But yes, Michelle, you kind of answered half of my, you voiced out half of my opinion. One thing is that, when there is a misinterpretation, if I'm on this side of the table where somebody else is misinterpreting my actions, I would say that I will build more trust by thinking that, by assuming that they don't really mean any harm to me. They just don't understand me because they are from a different culture and maybe I need to explain it to them. And the answer was that Michelle actually gave for me was empathy. That if I am misinterpreting something, then I would, I'll try to empathize with what they must be thinking and what they must be, trying to do, and how can I bridge that gap. So I think communication is the key in both the cases. Wherever it is misinterpretation, the base solution is always communication. So not hesitating to explain yourself and encouraging others to explain themselves so that you understand them better and you work with them better. You become successful, you make them also successful. That's all that we are all trying to do. So exercising empathy and trust both to reduce the misinterpretation part, that's what I would do.
Thank you for sharing. That's really good. Okay, Norm, what about you?
A couple of observations. To me, being culturally aware means being observant. So paying attention, look for ways to learn, look for ways to understand, and then use that knowledge. And a lot of the messages of the other panelists have shared that over and over again. So over time, I've learned some things about myself. I don't want to be seen as stupid, and I want to be liked. And I think probably everybody that hears that probably feels the same way. But it's very personal. You know, that's a personal gut feeling. I read somewhere recently that summed it up well. All people want to feel safe and welcome. And so these I think are truisms of people as people. So how do I adjust when my nature and the culture clash, you know, from my prior experience? So there's an important lesson that I learned that I would go back and teach my younger self, whether that younger is last week or 20 years ago. And that is, be willing to feel uncomfortable. And let me explain that. So if you've ever tried to learn a new language as an adult, which has come up in conversation multiple times already, at least, you know, after your language patterns are firmly set, trying to twist your mouth or force your tongue into odd ways is uncomfortable. And if you succeed, you feel weird. You sound weird to yourself. So think about that. You're uncomfortable because you did it right. But here's the thing, when you sound weird to yourself, you're the only one that feels that way. To everyone else, you sound, well, correct. When you feel uncomfortable, you make everyone around you uncomfortable with how you pronounce, perhaps. You know, I did learn something new about celebrating differences, and accents are rich and represent other experiences. And so, you know, I'm not saying that mispronouncing a word is wrong. It's just the sense that you feel personally is you feel uncomfortable, and culture can be the same. You have to be willing to understand and make adjustments, and that might make you feel uncomfortable. We can still celebrate cultural differences, but someone has to make a move, and you have to understand, you know, the differences, and so be willing to feel uncomfortable.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that is so true. Teresa, what about you?
So I was really young when my circumstance happened, so I'm not sure I would go back and do something differently necessarily, though I would have, you know, learned a little bit more tact potentially, or I don't know. It's really interesting to go back and revise what you would have told your 20-year-old self back then. What it did really make me aware of was how important language is. And that's something that has stuck with me to this day. And it's something that informed my schooling. It's something that informed my graduate degree. But language is really important, and it's really hard. And it is something where as you learn a language, you get into the slang or the idioms that you use, which is great for you and everybody who thinks and works with you in that particular, you know, small ecosystem that you work in. And it's completely baffling to anybody else, right? So what I have learned to do over time is I'm very formal, especially in written communications. At one time I was working in, and this is going to date me, I had a partner who was based in Korea, South Korea, and we were communicating via fax because the time difference was 14 hours. And so you had a 14-hour delay at least before an answer was going to come back or I was going to give an answer. So we had to be very specific about what we were talking about so that there was as little misunderstanding as possible, because picking up the phone was not going to work. So I became more formal over time in my language and do my very best to this day, even in spoken language, to reduce the number of contractions, idioms, especially sports idioms, because at least in the US culture, that's such a common thing. But it's again baffling to somebody else. Hit it out of the ballpark, which means a great thing, unless you know that that's a baseball idiom and that baseball is important to your culture, you're not going to understand what that is. And it extends even to how I write dates, because in different areas of the world, you write day, month, year versus month, day, year. And maybe that doesn't make such a difference from October through December, but the rest of the year it can be really confusing. You make a substantial difference, especially from a product management perspective. Did you need it in May or did you need it in July? That's a big change. And time differences, time and the way that we do here in the United States, the way that we do temperatures, Fahrenheit versus Celsius. No one else in the world really does Fahrenheit exclusively. So learning to adapt again, and to what Norm said and several others, making yourself uncomfortable to be in sync with other people. Everybody else is going to think that you're matching them, but these are principles that I have used to guide my professional career over the last particularly 20 years, is be a little bit more explicit and more formal in my language, so that I'm not saying it's at the beginning of something, it's first and 10. What? What does that mean? And being a little bit more conscious about how the rest of everyone else thinks and feels and communicates and writes. That is something I would go back to my younger self and have my younger self at age 20 start to practice, instead of starting that in a little bit later in my career.
Wow, thank you. That was so good, all of you. I'm like so inspired. And yes, I think I can also resonate with some of those idioms and like non-formal expressions. I mean, I think all of you know English is my second language, and I've spent majority of my career trying to like soften the accent, although every now and then I know I'm aware of it. I might mispronounce things here and there, but it is what it is. Some of us have an accent one way or another. And I remember when I was first learning English, it was through songs. So music has always been a part of me, because I would read the lyrics and then I would look it up in an actual physical dictionary and try to figure out, make sense of the words. So I was listening to this pop song when I was younger, and they were saying, ain't nothing like heartache or something. And I was like, I don't know that word. I went to the dictionary, I tried to find ain't, it's not there. And I'm like, but wait, what does that mean? Blah something. It took me months and months to find it, because again, I'm like, it's not written. There was no, oh, let me Google it. Like, it wasn't a thing. So once I finally learned it, like that one has always like stuck with me, because there's millions like that. And when you're learning another language, whether that's English, French, Chinese, Dutch, like people in conversational, they're not going to be textbook. There's going to be idioms and slang and references to sports or other things local. And it's important, like at least for me, it's always been important to like dig deeper and be curious and ask that person, where did that come from? How did that originate? Maybe even Google it, where did that expression was born? And it's just like something so fascinating, and like it just, you have to be aware of that and just honestly be okay with making mistakes. I think we're all going to make mistakes, but be open to it, be willing to learn. That's my 2 cents. But I know we have about 15 minutes. So I would just want to open up the floor. Anyone that wants to say anything extra, or hey, you know what, this other panelist said really resonated with me and I want to expand on it. So at this point, anyone who wants to speak, go for it. If all speak at once, maybe we'll raise a hand or something. But anyone wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Since you had me talking first, just kidding. So just fascinating. Thank you all. I mean, this is just, and I think going back to what Michelle said of empathy, in so many different colors and hues of empathy of what you all have said, being uncomfortable, not be afraid of being wrong, understand the culture. I think it's all about, well, and it's not the only thing, but empathy goes a really, really long way. Empathy to others, and I think most importantly, empathy to yourself. Because if you're empathetic to yourself, you will be able to be empathetic to others. And that represents, I mean, like Norman, when you're saying be uncomfortable, and that's, you can only be uncomfortable if you are at peace with who you are. And I think, I mean, that's an element of that. Another thing that I personally love about Rocket is I found a place where I can be myself. It is be yourself. I think there's that part of like be uncomfortable. I think you also have to measure the level of uncomfort. If the level of uncomfort is a level that will not allow you to be yourself, then you probably need to find a different place. But be comfortable with being uncomfortable is that kind of like allowing you to be yourself and feel like you need to push yourself to understand everybody else's point of view and work with everybody. I think that is just so, it's fascinating. And I kept, listening to everybody, and it's like, wow, yeah, empathy here, empathy there, in so many different forms. It's fascinating. So thank you all. It's amazing.
Yeah, for me, I learned several things through this process. Differences can be celebrated. Differences can be seen as rich experiences. The languages that each of you spoke, you speak those languages way better than I do. I only know English really well, and I don't know other languages well, and I'm learning, but you just, you celebrate that. But sometimes those differences, we've also learned, can get in the way, especially when we make assumptions that everyone operates under the same set of expectations. And while people are people everywhere you go, the cultures that we grow up in frame our interpretation of that world, of our needs, and how we understand how those happen. And those assumptions get in the way then of, or those cultural influences get in the way of communication at times, or misinterpret that. And really, that's the whole point here is celebrating diversity, celebrating difference, but also being aware of those differences and making adjustments to so that we avoid the downside of the differences.
And I'll share a quick story that's a pretty recent thing, talking about celebrating differences. So where I live in the United States, we have very little rain. We have, a handful of centimeters, a handful of inches of rain a year. It's just not a thing. So I'm somewhat, antagonistic about rain itself. Norm and I were in a different country this last fall, back in September, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And we had an outdoor activity. And let's just say that the jacket that I had brought that was supposed to be rain resistant was not. It was a wind resistant, but not a rain resistant. So I was extremely wet, and it was not particularly warm. So I could have had this really bad experience because it was raining sideways. It was extremely windy because it's raining sideways. We were out in the elements all day long, and it could have been a really terrible experience. But the guide that we had for that day was telling us about how the rain made the landscape come to life. And she would talk about this throughout the day. She was not native. She was not from this country. She was a transplant. She was actually Italian, and she was very Italian, so very expressive in what I think of as stereotypical Italian, whether that's correct or not. She felt that way to me, and she was so enthusiastic about the rain, and I started to see the landscape through her eyes. And it really did bloom, because she said, "You guys are so lucky it's raining." Okay, I don't like the rain, and I'm wet and I'm cold and everything else, but this is why. And she talked about this. We were with her about 10 hours, maybe a little bit longer than that. I don't like the rain. I loved the rain there because it made such a difference to what we were seeing and what we were experiencing. And I look back on that day where we were wet, my shoes squished. We were so wet. And I have my shoes are waterproof and very, very good. You know, I could have looked at this as a really bad thing. We had somebody across the aisle from us in this little tour bus that we were in who chose to have a very different opinion. She hated it. It was like it was this guide's personal responsibility that it was raining. You know, I don't know. But we had this great experience, and it was all just because of the difference in viewpoint. Can you switch your viewpoint so that you can experience something in the way it's meant to be experienced and get over yourself? So I had to get over my antipathy toward rain and learn to appreciate something different. And I have a great experience and a great memory to look back on now.
All these discussions reminded me of something that I really want to share because we anyway have some time. I used to learn Japanese when I was in college, and one of my friends who was senior to me in learning Japanese used to call me up every day to give me 2 words, and he would give me the translations of those 2 words, and then I was supposed to create sentences. By the time we reached the institute, I was supposed to construct sentences out of those 2 words and, you know, give it to him so that he could evaluate how I'm learning. When doing that, we both realized at some point that there are some words that cannot be translated verbatim in another language. And then that became our thing. And now that as a professional, I'm supposed to use only plain English, which is called global English, not US English, not UK English, not Indian English, plain English. One word, one meaning, no confusion. There's no fear of getting lost in translation if a machine translates the content that we are writing. When I stick to that language, it feels inadequate. It does feel inadequate, but it gets the job done. While it gets the job done, the human part of it is lost somewhere. And I keep thinking about these unique words that each culture has, each language has, that shapes the human mind. And it takes me back to how language shapes young minds and why mother tongue is so important. Why now in my language it's called mother tongue, but I think in German it's called your father's language. I don't know for sure, but yeah. So these things, how they make us humans, it's really fun to experience that with all of you. Thanks for that.
Thank you. All right, any final remarks? I know we could go on and on and on for hours, so this has been amazing. Thank you all. But I know we also have a job to do and we have to go back to work. So I will just close it out by saying a massive thank you to all of you for participating, for being engaging. Just an invitation to join Ride if you haven't already. You can reach out to Livy or to Alice. I'm happy to give you their contacts, but they're on the screen. I mean, totally optional, but we do all sorts of these events. If you want to stay tuned to join another one, you can also join the Ride channel. But with that being said, just on behalf of the entire Ride team and our fellow Rocketeers, I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating, for sharing. I personally appreciate all the insights and everything. And I will just close us out with, like I said, I'm big on the impact between music and languages and how cultures are represented. So one of my favorite songs talks about trust, and it says, trust is something you can't fake. It's delicate and fragile, and it's something you could easily break. And I think based on what we all heard today, it's when I say trust me, you need to back it up. And a lot of it goes back to what we've been saying, like empathy and putting yourself in the other shoes. You can't just blindly say trust me and expect someone will take you for your word. Like it has to be developed. It has to be like some sort of connection between like both parties. And with that being said, have a good day, everyone.